Houses were floating. There's all these crazy visuals. We didn't have water at our house for 6 weeks. And that got me thinking, you know, okay, we actually may need to rethink our critical infrastructure security.
This is Funded, a show where founders who raised millions in venture capital share the gritty side of what it actually took to get that money in the bank. I'm Jason Ye. Not too long ago, I was trying to get my ideas funded. And back in the day, I was a VC listening to founders pitch me for money. Pitching hardware security for connected devices won't make most Silicon Valley VCs' hearts flutter. It doesn't have the flashy hook of a consumer app or the obvious narrative of an AI-native startup. But Jackson Schultz, a first-time founder who left Google right after the birth of his second son, with no VC network, saw something most people missed and began building something special. After happening upon a co-founder whose technology could be reapplied to his use case, things got pretty interesting. The pre-seed fundraise he raised had elements from a grab bag of unexpected places, pivoting a strategy mid-process, building an angel army of CISOs and supply chain executives, investing out of their own pockets, and ultimately landing a lead investor who had originally cold messaged his co-founder about a completely different company. Jackson surprised me with how methodical and self-aware he was about a process that could have easily broken him. But before we get into any of that, I had to find out what he was like long before critical infrastructure security was even a thought.
I was a high energy kid, for sure. I know one of the things you like to ask is people's parents and sort of what they did from a career perspective. And I think the few podcasts that I tuned into, folks had parents that were college professors, and that actually is a parallel. So both of my parents were college professors. My dad was at Berklee College of Music for years. My mother was at Salem State University, where I did my undergrad. And I think my childhood was surrounded by people in academia, which I think had its blessings and had its curses, right? As for me, I was a pretty high energy kid, definitely had ADHD that I struggled with, had a ton of different hobbies, loved to do a little bit of everything. And that has kind of reigned through today. I still definitely can fall into jumping into new activities and getting really into them for like 6 months. And then I'm not so interested in doing this anymore.
As the kid of college professors, you normally think of college professors as sort of like bookish and quiet. Or did that, it sounded like you were high energy, but like, were you outgoing? Were you an introvert?
I was, yeah. So I was very outgoing. I've always been an extrovert. I get my energy from being around people, having conversations.
So the extroversion gene certainly can be helpful in some of the topics that we're going to cover later. But I think even being outgoing and being around people doesn't necessarily like, lead to you to what you're doing today, especially if your parental role models are what I would call the exact opposite of entrepreneurs. So, as you're growing up and being around that world of academia, did you have an idea of what you might grow into in terms of career or like what your early thoughts were where you were going to end up?
Yeah, so it is funny. I feel like you're correct that academics definitely are the opposite of entrepreneurs, but I will say my experience was a little bit different. My mother was an author, so she definitely published and had this entrepreneurial spirit, I think, in just in her writing and her creativity. And then my dad actually was a jazz musician. So he was a professor at Berklee College of Music, but he was also gigging and arguably as entrepreneurial as it gets. And he had a saying when I was growing up, you never say no to a gig because you never know who's watching, right? And so I tried to embrace that in a lot of the opportunities that I would take on as early in life and then throughout college. Like, if I had an opportunity to work a job, learn something, I really did try to take those opportunities because I never knew who I might meet in those settings. And so I think that was a really valuable experience. Is like, I know today, maybe in your 30s, everyone's like, oh, learn the power of no. And the power of no is important. But I also think there is some power to yes. Yes, I'll take this on. Yes, I'll try this thing. And I think it really positions you for success later in life because then maybe you can prioritize the things you should say no to versus what might be an opportunity to say yes to.
I'm glad you clarified what your parents were getting into because those are very different. Those are very different profiles than just pure academia.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, a musician is a solo entrepreneur, like
Yeah.
running their own book of business, if you will. And I think like having some kind of role model that shows you that you can be your own person and you can create your own things, like certainly shows a path where something like this would be possible. And I have to imagine like the son of an author and a jazz musician had to have taken a bunch of yeses, like random yeses to find their way to, I don't know, hardware security. And then actually like that's kind of we're gonna talk about your very first round of capital that you raised, because I feel like over the course of this company, you're gonna have a lot of opportunities to talk about ArgusEye, where it started, et cetera. And that's not usually what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the dynamics of you being like, "We're gonna go raise capital." But because this is your first round and because I know a little bit of this background, I do wanna know, like, you sort of find yourself relatively deep in your career as an expert at Google around security. And so I wanna, like so we're skipping a bunch of steps, but I'm taking you back to your time at Google. Tell me a little bit about, like, what you were doing at Google, and I wanna know this transition point of, like, I'm doing something at Google, I'm probably building an expertise or seeing problems being solved in this space. And tell me what you're thinking about an opportunity in front of you. Is it like, I just want to like pull on this thread? Do you know anything about running startups or venture backed startups? That part of the story I can't tell just by looking at a LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. So I was working as part of a small tiger team at Google. Essentially, we were like a small but mighty team of four at the time that I left. And essentially, our job was to partner with product areas to make sure that they weren't doing business in a risky way. And if they were, inform them of what that risk maybe was.
Mm.
My experience at Google was great. I worked for a phenomenal manager, arguably the best manager I've ever worked for. His name was DJ Arguello. And I worked for him for a little over 5 years. He ended up leaving. He got a better opportunity. And that was sort of a signal that it was also my time to start thinking about what was next. Um, he always had a saying that people work for people, not places. And I think that's absolutely true. And when someone's invested in you, put you in positions of leadership, and then they decide they have a better opportunity that they want to move to, it's an opportunity for you to kind of reflect and think about what's next. And so that was probably the first shoe to drop uh, in terms of thinking about what I wanted to do. And then, as you know, I had my second son in July, and then I had very generous paternity leave from Google. And that gave me a lot of time to reflect on, was returning the right thing for me? Is there something else I want to be doing? What am I being pulled towards? And what is the mission that I really want to bring front and center in my life? I didn't have hardware security in my background. I've been a cybersecurity generalist. I've done consulting. I went and got a master's in cybersecurity from Brown, graduated there 2018. I went to Discover to help lead the third party information security program. And then I was recruited out of there to go to Google. So, really, no hardware background, but I know we're not trying to get too much into the founding story, but a book that really inspired initially was Lights Out by Ted Koppel, which is essentially Ted Koppel, the journalist, did a lot of research into what would happen if there was a large scale cyber attack on our critical infrastructure. And the picture that he paints is quite stark. And I remember reading that as part of my master's, and I thought, wow, someone should really do something about this. like this is a big problem. Someone should solve this problem. And that was 2018 that I read that, and I pushed it to the side and put it down and moved on. And then I'm in Asheville, North Carolina. We actually lived through Hurricane Helene, which was a pretty insane natural disaster. Nobody really expected Asheville to get a hurricane. It's supposed to be a climate change haven, and as was being marketed. And so when the hurricane came through and our river went from 4 feet up to 28 feet, we saw this insane devastation. And houses were floating. There's all these crazy visuals. We didn't have water at our house for 6 weeks. And that got me thinking, okay, we actually may need to rethink our critical infrastructure security. And if a natural disaster can do this, I started reflecting on Ted Koppel's book. Imagine what a large scale cyber could do. And that's kind of what got me thinking about this hardware space. So this happened in 2014, and then my manager leaving in the spring of 2015, then me going out on leave. I think it was sort of one thing led to another to get me reflecting on, okay, what am I actually doing, and should I be doing something different?
Yeah. And I want to do a bit of a primer question before, I lead you down this one path. But when you were like, okay, there's something that I'm being called to this book is inspiring me around a problem space. In your mind, did you know what you were building? Is it a small consulting practice? Is it like, I think this is the next Wiz or whatever cybersecurity company is for? Like, where was your head at first?
I think I really started to reflect on the product that I wanted to build, and I was using a lot of generative AI, just trying to get familiar with the capabilities. And I did see a lot of opportunity to leverage this in the space that I wanted to work in. And essentially, the product we built applies AI lens to disparate data and makes meaning of it from a security perspective. That's essentially how I would describe what we're building. And so initially, I don't know if I had thought deeply about raising venture. I really just wanted to dip my toe in the water, start building, and see if there was interest. And so, one of the things that I was also doing on the side was I teach a class at a local university near where I live in North Carolina. And I was asked to help inform the curriculum to beef up what the students are learning. It's essentially a intro to cybersecurity course for business majors. And so I started talking to industry professionals about some of the challenges that they're facing in emerging areas in cybersecurity. And I think I already had this bug of what I wanted to build, but I spoke with over 100 security leaders, and I may have kind of led the conversation to be in line with kind of this thing I wanted to build. I was like, hey, what are the challenges? And everyone kept saying, we really don't have a way to make sure that our connected devices are secure from inception. Design is really hard. Threat modeling is really difficult. There's this emerging regulation coming out of the EU that is going to require that you have robust product security practices. And all of these things seem to be signals that I was heading down the right path and kept pursuing this light at the end of the tunnel. I think I want to go this way. And one thing led to another, and here we are.
Well, okay. So this, by the way, I mean, I think this is one path to raising capital that is a very good, it's like a very deliberate one. There are all sorts of flavors of running a playbook to raising venture capital dollars, especially if you come from the world and you kind of know who the players are and how to like tickle their fancy and get people excited and where everyone wants to do it. But if you want to be deliberate about it and you're really actually like, I just want to build the right business. And when I find out that it's a big business, I'm going to need to capitalize it. Then I go after it. This is probably the path, right? You have the conversations, you test the hypotheses that you have in your mind, you get other people's feedback around it, and you start doing what you can do, right? You start building maybe to build more conviction for yourself, but just actually to start the business. And so for you, you kind of yada yada yada, and now we're here today. I actually now want to zoom into tell me like what actually is the point in the journey where you're like, we're gonna raise capital. Like, like I see where the capital will be used. I know why we're gonna do this. Do you remember what was happening in the company or some of the signals that you saw internally? What Jackson is about to share is one of those moments that reminds you that the path to a yes is almost never a straight line. And sometimes the best move is to stop trying to raise the round you planned. When we get back, the story. The founders I see that do best in company building and fundraising have a secret weapon. Their secret weapon is a community of people, of experts, of peers in the startup industry that they can ask for help from at any time, guide them through processes like fundraising. I wanted to make that easier for everyone else to have access to by building the Adamant fundraising program and community. This gives you access to 75 different training videos around the fundraising process to give you that expert starting point around how to actually execute fundraising, and then access to a community where we host live pitch deck teardowns and office hours every week to make sure that you can ask the minute questions on how your deck should be better, how you should reform your strategy, how you should answer investors who are reaching out to you that you don't know how to answer. So if you want to check that out, if you want to get the secret weapon that I think a lot of the best founders have, check out adamantfundraising.com and join us today.
Yeah. The first thing I want to emphasize is I was very fortunate to have found an amazing co-founder to go down this journey with me. So, you know, Lawrence Abaria is amazing. He was at NVIDIA for 10 years. He's got a PhD in computer science. He led an automotive simulation division at Cruise, and then he left Cruise and founded Verdant Robotics. They raised 50 million. He is one of the smartest people I've ever worked with, one of the strongest engineers I've ever worked with. And I was introduced to him by a mutual friend who knew I wanted to build in this space. and he knew that Lawrence had the chops. So Lawrence left for robotics and then started building an AI product in the agriculture space. He got a lot of experience building, and I got so lucky that basically he built an amazing product that he found out didn't have a market. And sometimes that happens. But the product was still amazing. And I pitched him at a time when he was still trying to build something, wanted to work in partnership with someone, build a product. And essentially, what we were able to do was just take the product that he built, tune it a little bit, and apply it to the problem space that I wanted to solve.
No
And
way.
so we basically got like a 2-year head start on our product without needing to necessarily raise venture funding initially.
Well,
And so when we were able to get folks in front of the product, we were able to develop an amazing product in what looked like a really short amount of time. People see the product, their eyes get wide, and they're like, "We had no idea this was possible." Um,
well,
and so that was really the signal that, okay, these are Fortune 500 companies. If they're blown away, we have a large opportunity here. I think we do need to raise some capital to hire, to scale, to market, basically grow this business in a way that fits the opportunity and need.
wow. That's really cool. I mean, a couple of things that I'll reflect back is like you've heard the phrase, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. Like you make your own luck and the networks that you have and the people that are connecting you. So I think it's great to share that with people where sometimes those things happen. And
Mm.
as a side note, I have had the pleasure of spending some time with Lawrence, and I always tell him if he weren't a technologist, he would have a backup career as a voice actor. God,
Yes.
it's a great
Yes.
voice.
No question. No question.
Mhm. A little bit more about the conversations that start with venture capitalists, and especially with an early stage company, doesn't have a ton of signal yet, right? Like you had the advantage of being able to repurpose some technology that gave you this head start, maybe more of a demo than normally would have had. There's initial conversations with customers, right? For investors who are trying to jump early and catch something before the wave hits, there's a little bit of reading in between the lines. There's trying to see where the conviction and not just made up stuff. Two young kids, one just out, and a company who is known for taking care of their employees and the parents at their companies. Like, deciding to leave that behind, not to give you any anxiety hives. Like, there's a big signal in a founder being like, look, yeah, just had my second kid. I have two kids under the age of 3, all that like healthcare and support and paternity leave and all this stuff. Like, yeah, I'm leaving that behind
Mhm.
because I see something. I mean, I'm not sure if founders have heard that much, but like, yeah, knowing that someone has this sort of responsibility and still does that in the face of all that pressure is one thing. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about what you think investors maybe picked up on. I just want you to share like what was on your plate or what were you showing? What was part of the story that you think like really got people going?
Yeah, so the big thing initially from a market perspective was just customer interest. And so one of the things that we were able to put in our pre-seed fundraising deck, we had our pipeline, we had like all this information about who was interested, who we've spoken with, but it's really hard to know how legitimate those companies in the pipeline are at the stage, particularly when they're Fortune 500 companies, right? So what I was able to do was get interest testimonials from people at those companies, take a screenshot, put them following the pipeline, and explain this to the VCs. And I'd say, look, at this stage, you don't know how serious this interest is, but here's 5 screenshots from these people describing this product that they're requesting and explaining how this is such a force multiplier for this problem they're trying to solve. Like, they're like, please build this and we will buy it. And so I think that was a really useful way to convey the importance of and the urgency that was essentially present in the market.
Got it. On the flip side of that, like, look, there was some signal, but you're still early, right? Do you remember what the consistent pushback on you was? Like, what was it? Was it a description of the team? Was it Jackson's never done a company before? What were the things that you remember coming up over and over again that you had to overcome?
We were fortunate. We actually really had a lot of positive feedback around the team.
Mm.
Again, I was very fortunate to have a partner who's a third-time founder, right? And that is a signal that at least one half of this union can execute, right? I think I was definitely the risk, but I also think that VCs like folks that haven't founded something before, particularly when they partner with someone who have. And I think I brought the energy, enthusiasm, motivation, and there is attractiveness in a first-time founder. But then Lawrence brought realism, calm, like certainty, and I think that that gave them comfort that it wasn't just completely a risk. But I do think there is something attractive about investing in first-time founders, or at least I hope that to be true, because
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of companies out there that have good first-time founders that should get a look, right? But that was definitely something that helped. I think that the pushback was really around market sizing.
Mm.
And the other thing was we're doing cybersecurity for connected devices, right? And connected devices is, I think a lot of VCs look at that world and think unsexy or think this is old school. What are these guys thinking? And what I had to learn was to communicate that this is not just connected devices like baby monitors or
Mm.
like camera systems. If you think about where the industry is going, we're positioning ourselves to be embedding AI at the edge, so at the device level, right? And so these devices that we rolled out that actually can do things, these devices can make decisions. A 2% error out, yeah, well, it could lead to death, particularly if we're looking at smart water treatment systems, or we're
Yeah.
looking at any of these industrial control systems, right? Or surgical robots. So this is the future that we're actually building towards. And I initially had to learn how to communicate that message because I was just anchoring on connected device security and people are thinking printers, right? And that's really not the future that we're building toward.
And so now what I want to bring you to is this could have happened very early on in the process. This could have happened after like a couple meetings, but you know, especially in an early stage company with a first time CEO that maybe it wasn't exactly from the industry. I think it's hard to completely like just go, oh my God, this is obvious bet. We got to go bet on these guys. And so there generally is this like waiting to jump in the pool thing where like we're talking and talking and talking and like maybe give you a market size reason. People are kind of waiting, but there is always this kind of like tipping point, especially for an initial investor who wants to raise their hand and be like, we want to go do this. Tell me a little bit about that because there is a fun tipping point where you kind of feel the momentum move.
Mhm.
Is it were you able to close an angel that kicked off this thing, or was it your eventual lead who was the only one that actually would jump forward? Do you remember where that momentum shift happened?
I remember exactly where that momentum shift happened.
Okay.
So it's true. I pitched a lot, right? And your point about continually iterating, evaluating your pitch, thinking about the messaging, asking for feedback, and continue to evolve is critical. We came so close so many times. We were in due diligence with a couple firms, and they just at the end of the day ended up saying no. And so for us, we decided because we were initially trying to raise a pre-seed, we decided that we were going to just try to raise an angel bridge and position ourselves for a seed next year once we could close a few more customers. And so we brought on, as you know, because I hit you up for money and I sent you an email. And so we ended up bringing on some incredible angel investors that I think ended up being high signal to the VC world. Cassie Crossley as one of our angels. She was the former VP of supply chain at Schneider Electric. Kurt John is the CISO of Con Edison. Anders Naremo, he founded a company, sold it to BitSite. Ray Cotton is the CISO of Archer. And so these folks were essentially our first set of believers. And because they have so much credibility and depth of knowledge in the space, I think that was an opportunity for VCs to say, okay, hang on a second here. If these people are investing out of pocket to bring this product to market, maybe we need to take another look. And so we had essentially decided we were just going to close our pre-seed round. And that was right around the time we ended up finding our lead and they ended up coming through and we couldn't be more ecstatic to have them in our camp. They are probably the perfect venture capital firm to be backing us at this stage because they believe in the future of supply chain, the future and innovation of our physical economy. That's their thesis. And so they recognize you can't fix critical infrastructure without addressing critical risks.
Love it. So very, very cool to tell this story too. And it's a typical thing that I see, which is like you go down the path with some of these investors and they don't have all the conviction and there isn't enough pressure around them to have to like jump or they don't feel like they're going to lose the deal. And so they have the opportunity to be like, this is a cool team. This is a good team. And I love that you explained how you ended up sort of restarting the strategy and being like, we know we can get a lot done with angels. And I'm very well known to to talk about the strategy of like Angel Army and what that can provide, not only operational capital, but more so the sort of credibility and the additional network that comes in just by adding a few names. But the fact that the CISO of these large hardware companies are, like you said, investing out of pocket and from a place of real deep expertise that certainly none of these VCs have, it means a lot. Right?
Yeah.
And so I wonder if we can then transition to saying, okay, you started doing that. How did you meet the eventual lead investor that you signed with? And tell me a little bit about that relationship before it actually went into full blown like pitching and closing.
Yeah. What I would recommend for founders is definitely put the startup logo while you're building. That's what Lawrence did. And he got a lot of DMs, right? LinkedIn messages, people saying, hey, what are you building? And so that was actually how we met our lead investor is when Lawrence was working on his agricultural AI company, they reached out to him and he never got back to them. He wasn't actively raising, he's focused on building and he's like, I'll just get back. And so we were talking about where to go next. And he was like, these guys reached out to me. Should we talk to them? And I'm always, yeah, we should talk to everybody. Absolutely. Let's have a conversation with them. And so they reached out to Lawrence, not really sure what he was working on. And then 6 months, 7 months later, we pinged them back and we said, hey, we'd love to take a meeting. We're actually working on a cybersecurity product. We think it does align with what you're interested in. We pitched them. There was instant chemistry. I remember our second meeting, they told me they walked away from our first meeting incredibly excited, right? And that's the ultimate like signal that okay, we have something here and maybe we do see the world the same way. And so, yeah, it ended up being a connection that we circled back with later that ended up manifesting. Yeah, we couldn't be more excited about being backed by Civ.
Dude, fascinating. And the lead investor's name is? Oh,
Joy Mitra is the partner on the firm, and Civ is the fund.
love it. Love it. We know a little bit about them because based in Los Angeles and have a great partnership there. So excited for you to be able to take on such a cool firm. And in particular, like hearing more stories about more ways that people get in touch with venture capitalists. Like there's a common one, which is the warm introduction. There are people who have great stories around cold intro. I don't actually think we've covered this. And I love the call out, by the way. It seems so simple and maybe some people think it's cringy or dumb or whatever. But look, there are hustlers in the VC community who are always looking for founders to meet early or founders to put on their radar.
Yeah.
I think we have to remember, yes, you could be as a VC searching for the company or the role stealth founder, stealth company, stealth whatever,
Mm.
but you might not get what you all had. And that's because, as a reminder, if I were to click on Lawrence's profile and it said stealth and I looked at his background, I'd be like, whoa, that's a really compelling founder who
Yeah.
is now working on something else, right? So, look, will that work for everyone? No. But in combination of all the things, and you have to go through the flow, you essentially have to go through the conversion flow of a venture capitalist. So, yes, we'll be looking for that. It's a great tip to share people. But from there, when they land on the landing page of your profile, like what do they see? What do they read? Like what are the things that might actually compel them to reach out, right?
Well, it goes back to something that you've always emphasized too, which is if VC firms feel like they found a deal or found a great, they source that themselves. That's their bias. Like, oh, we got something here that we found that other people didn't have access to, and that's totally true.
Yeah, it is their hard work, the thing that they did, the proprietary actions
Yeah.
are what sourced it, not because everyone else passed on this deal, but they caught you guys early, which in this case is absolutely true. So good on that firm and good on you guys.
Well, and the other thing too that I think helped was we kind of decided that if we were going to just not raise a pre-seed round and just try to raise a seed, and so we went from kind of a position of vulnerability to a position of comfort in the fact that we were able to have some runway with our angel checks, and it sort of took the pressure off. And as soon as you take the pressure off, I think that's when these good outcomes manifest.
Oh man, I literally just went through a conversation with some founders in the community about this of like, there is something that changes on both ends of the psychology that both impact a deal happening. It changes the psychology of the founder, right? Where you're like, I used to be chasing and I used to be even though I was told not to chase, like, it's so hard to not feel like, "Oh my god, I need
Yeah,
to close every deal,"
absolutely.
right? And then on the other side, the investor hearing, "We don't need your money." They're like, "We don't want your money. We don't need your money. We have all the money that we said we're gonna raise,"
Yeah.
is like, now we know that these guys are talking to us not because they need us, and that is just, whew, another stimulator in terms of interest level.
Yeah.
Do you remember when the call or the message came in from the lead partner that they'll let you know, like, "Hey, we wanted to do this deal." Like, was it a phone call? Was it a text?
Yeah, so I remember I actually met with one of the other partners, Jeff Rosenthal, the night before, and he kind of came in as what felt like the closer. We had a great conversation. He was like talking about the value that Civ as a fund could bring, everybody's backgrounds. They're all experienced operators. Patrick, who's the CEO of the firm, has founded and exited multiple companies. So they have a ton of credibility and expertise. And Jeff was explaining all of this. And so it was at that point that I was like, okay, it doesn't really feel like I'm pitching anymore. It feels like they're really interested in what we're doing. And now they're telling us about how they can help. Right. And then that was kind of the signal that we were likely going to make a deal. And then the next day, we had a FaceTime with the team. Abijoy and Mitch Brady called in. We're like, yeah, we're super excited to be backing you all. It was phenomenal. It's hard to put into words because it was so much work to get to that point. And it was bittersweet because then you're like, okay, now the work really starts. So, you can celebrate for a little bit. My wife was in the background. She burst into tears 'cause she knew how hard I did things. So she was ecstatic at like, my hard work and all the pitching and practice paying off. And Lawrence was also incredibly relieved. And it was this sense of euphoria, but it was also this like, all right, well, now we build. We can't take your eye off the ball, right? That's the other piece is it's a celebration but now you have a new test, right? But again, I was thrilled to have their confidence and the ability to just continue to build this thing that I know the market needs.
It's a great story, and because you're kind of going through it very new to the industry and new to venture capital and stuff, I think there's so much to pull apart. Like what we discussed is very instructional around like, you bumped little bumps in the road and this is what you learned. This is how you felt. Now that you have like a full year of experience and startup gray hair, what are some big tips or what are the things that you wish someone had sat you down and told you either about the starting of this company or the fundraising process that you think would be an unlock?
Yeah. So the first is don't stop talking to people, right? Like just talk to people, show them your product, get feedback. Don't ask them to pay for anything. Don't ask them to buy it. Just show it to them. If you can get them to use it, that's great. But just get feedback, right? And every time you share something, you ask for feedback. It gives you new talking points and ways to communicate your value add. So that is super critical. The next is, when you're selling to customers, you have to communicate what you can do for them today. How are you going to help them today? When you're pitching to VCs, you have to talk about what you're going to be doing in the future, why this opportunity is so big, where you're going to go, right? And that was something I had to learn on the fly as well. Like I think I was communicating to VCs what I'm doing today and how, and I think that's probably why I got some questions on market sizing. Is this really as big of an opportunity as
Yeah.
as you think it is? And I had a hard time communicating why it was bigger than it seemed on the surface until I revisited, looked ahead, and was able to outline the strategy and where we were going to go. So that's another critical piece. And then in the pitches, I always had Lawrence there, and so sometimes we would joint pitch, but mostly he would kind of just have me do it. He's got that strong Spanish accent, didn't want to roll as many R's, so he passed the buck to me to pitch. But I was really lucky to have him there because I was able to get coaching, right? Like after we'd hang up, this part was great. You rambled here. You need to be more clear here, be crisper over here. That was really helpful.
Well, that last one is good. And it's good that I love that your partnership is so new, but you guys had already developed that sort of transparency and clear communication able to take that feedback.
Dude, so I mean, the team that I worked on at Google had a culture of feedback, and it does require this level of safety with your colleagues to be able to actually give each other feedback. But I think it's something that DJ instilled in the rest of the team, and we really put into practice, right? Like, and you have to be coachable in every step of life. You can't assume that you know it all. And I do think that is something that I've gotten a lot better at in the past 5 years. Basically, the entire time that I spent at Google was becoming more coachable, being more open to listening to other people's perceptions, because I know it's phrase is so common, but perception really is reality. The beautiful thing about feedback is you have the power to change someone else's perception and someone else's reality in the way that they're interacting with you. And so if you're not open to feedback and you're not coachable, you're not going to be able to get to the point of being able to pitch in confidence and convey the message that you need. So yeah, that's also part of the culture that we're trying to convey here. That and unspoken expectations or premeditated resentments. I believe that in my soul as well.
Love that. Well, Jackson, I think the whole story you told is a illustration of you becoming great at iterating and reacting to and improving based on feedback from your environment, feedback from the people you're talking to, your customers, investors, all to get to this point. I did want to wrap up the conversation with one really important question, which of course I could have asked ChatGPT about, but wanted to hear your description. Why Argus Eye? Or I don't even know if Argus Eye is the right way to say this, but
Yeah.
I was like, man, they really made up some random word. And then I went to go type in the the name, and there's like other examples of this. So what's the etymology, or why does it fit what you're doing?
Yeah, so there was a thousand-eyed, all-seeing giant in the Odyssey named Argus, and we kind of view ourselves as being that end-to-end visibility product from product design through to launch, and we think we really embody that all thousand-eye sort of structure. And so, yeah, we liked the name. It made a lot of sense, and we kind of rolled with it, and we're just hoping to build a good reputation around it.
Love it. All right, Jackson, thanks so much, man. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
That was Jackson Schultz, co founder and CEO of ArgusEye, a platform giving connected device manufacturers access to AI product security for critical manufacturing. What I loved about Jackson was how down to earth he is in his approach to building the business. He keeps the main thing and is focused on solving the problems right in front of him. When we come back, I'll debrief some of the points of our chat that I found most interesting. There are a ton of easy mistakes founders make while growing a company. I've either made them all myself or watched them happen as an investor. One that keeps showing up, treating finance like a back office task instead of the central nervous system of the whole operation. I get why it happens. You're past the scrappy stage, but still feel too early for a full finance team. So you patch together spreadsheets, make decisions with partial data, and rely on gut to fill the gaps. Meanwhile, your competitors, especially in the AI era, aren't winging it. They're running on intelligent financial systems that give them clarity, foresight, and speed. My advice, don't wait. At least talk to someone who can show you what real financial clarity unlocks. Not just cleaner books, but the data and foresight that actually become competitive advantages. If you need a place to start, look at Propeller Industries. They're not the fractional CFOs who show up once a month. They embed into your team, your weekly rhythms, your forecasting cycles, your board prep. They've worked with more than 1,300 venture and growth stage companies, so they bring real pattern recognition plus the tools of an enterprise finance org. Set up a free call at propellerindustries.com and tell them we sent you. They're giving our audience a one-time $2,500 credit for new clients who stay for 3 months. Okay, back to the show. All right, so I'm excited to go into this debrief for this conversation with Jackson because there were a couple things that really stood out to me. The first was I should point out that the reason that I know Jackson is that I met his co-founder, Lawrence, before they ever got together. So when I knew Lawrence, Lawrence was working on something else. And as you heard in the story, Jackson met him through an introduction, and they found out that they might be good partners. They might be able to work on the same problem together. And it turned out Lawrence was working on some technology that could be retrofitted into what Jackson wanted to use the technology for in the application of cybersecurity. So it was this kind of marriage that came together without a lot of relationship ahead of time, without a lot of warming up. And I wanted to point out how unique that is and how impressed I was at the stories that Jackson told about their relationship, about their transparency, their ability to give each other feedback. And it's a very unique situation. And that type of chemistry can be something that will make or break a startup early on. And I would say, I bet that investors that were meeting them early on, probably by the end of it, were looking to meet both of them at the same time. And having a great dynamic, having great communication is something that probably benefited them both in the fundraise and in building this company. So very unique, something that I would encourage people to try to model this idea of if I don't know my co-founder from previous experience from many, many years of either working together or being friends, and you're going into a new co-founder relationship, try to figure out the communication channels, the way that you can be honest with each other so that things like open and honest feedback and very specific direct communication are not things that will hold you back. The second thing that I really wanted to underline within this debrief was how much momentum Jackson was able to build as he was getting ready to go raise capital. Didn't seem like this thing where he was like, I want to build momentum before raising capital necessarily. But momentum is such a strong thing when it comes to investor psychology in terms of what they react to, what resonates with them. And so the two main things that I'll call out was as they were working and as they were having conversations, the main thing stayed the main thing around talking to Fortune 500 CISOs, trying to figure out how we could work with them, how they could actually land them as customers. And then, while Jackson might not have had a formal VC network, he had come from the space of cybersecurity and he could get to CISOs. So, getting these individual angels on board to put in little checks into the company shows a ton of momentum when it comes to talking to outside investors. It shows both investors in general of the individual kind, of the angel kind are getting convinced to put money in them. And then add on top of them being CISOs, being experts in the industry, also putting their full support behind them. This is another form of momentum that investors started hearing about. So more of the right people getting on board to invest, more of the right people on board putting their stamp of approval, and then more of the right customers signing on and showing that they were interested in piloting the software. So all of that together, plus probably some fundraising momentum, is stuff that really tips the edge to get people to really kick off a great fundraise. All right, that's my short analysis of this conversation with Jackson from ArgusEye. Hopefully that was helpful, and that's a debrief. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions about today's show, or maybe you're raising capital yourself and want help problem solving, you can find me on social. I'm at JAYEH, that's JAYYEH on almost any social platform. And you can email me at jason@fundedpod.com. I also have a newsletter where I share tips, strategies, tactics around fundraising. You can find that and all the other ways that I support founders in their work to fundraise more effectively and efficiently at my website. That's admnt.com, short for adamant. You can find me there and figure out if there's anything that I can help you with.